In Taiwan, adzuki beans are an everyman's food, appearing in street snacks like wheel cakes and sweet soup. But these unassuming red beans were once the pinnacle of sophistication. During the Japanese colonial era, desserts made with the beans could only be enjoyed by the wealthiest families. In tonight's Sunday Special Report, we take you on a journey through time to explore the history of this timeless treat.
台湾では米が2度取れます。蓬莱米という内地米とほとんど変わらない良い米が。
During the Japanese colonial period, basic goods were in short supply, meaning most crops were grown for their value as sustenance. Sweets were a real luxury, so farmers didn't cultivate produce for use in desserts. If you were to ask most farmers back then what an azuki bean was, chances are they would say they'd never seen one. During Japanese rule, popular Japanese treats made with adzuki, such as wheel cakes, stuffed mochi, and sweet buns, started arriving to Taiwan, where they were only enjoyed by a select few.
During the Japanese colonial period, Taiwan got imagawayaki, that is, adzuki bean wheel cakes. Adzuki beans were very expensive back then, so they would ship them in from China or Japan. They were things that only the more affluent people could afford to eat.
Adzuki beans have a revered place in Japanese cuisine. They aren't just used to make pastries for traditional tea ceremonies. Their nutritional value and beautiful color made them a staple at religious rites after the 7th century, when Buddhist doctrine banned the consumption of four-legged animals in Japan. In Taiwan, 50 years of Japanese colonial rule deeply ingrained in people's minds the idea that adzuki bean was luxurious and precious. The Japanese left, but the love for adzuki beans stayed behind. After World War II, adzuki beans remained scarce and cherished. But as they began being cultivated in Taiwan, they started appearing in daily life in the form of treats such as adzuki beans on ice in summer or adzuki bean soup in winter. Precisely because of their exclusivity, the beans were popular as religious offerings.
来找您720，后面还有什么？
一个红豆，一个花生，大的。
大的要切吗？拜给花给。
Offer rice cakes for riches. Offer a tortoise for longevity. Eat them for good luck, peace, happiness, and beauty.
In rural areas, red tortoise cakes were once a delicacy made only for special occasions. They're made with glutinous rice dough dyed white and red and stuffed with a dark-colored filling. The tricolor scheme lines up perfectly with the three main characters in The Oath of the Peach Garden, an event in the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms. That's why now, when bakers make the cakes, they often recite the names of the three brothers. Today, it would seem that the cakes have always been stuffed with adzuki beans. But actually, the adzuki bean filling is an example of Taiwan-Japanese fusion developed after the war.
During the Japanese colonial period and even before, Taiwanese red tortoise cakes would be filled with mung beans, sesame, or salty ingredients. Adzuki beans were very expensive, so most households couldn't use them. Older people might have thought, during the Japanese colonial period, only rich people could afford to eat adzuki beans, but now I can afford them too, so let's put them in the red tortoise cake.
The craze for adzuki beans fueled their cultivation in Taiwan. Adzuki bean farmers have to avoid the spring and summer, where pests proliferate and diseases spread. To truly thrive, the plants need to be kept between 25 and 30 degrees. That makes the autumn season in Kaohsiung and Pingtung the ideal time and place for cultivation. The first adzuki bean fields appeared here in the 1960s. At the beginning, farmers who grew adzuki beans there were a very small minority. That's because, for the autumn harvest, most farmers opted for crops such as sweet potatoes for feeding their pigs or soybeans for making soy sauce.
The
Kaohsiung Agricultural Improvement Station started cultivating adzuki beans in 1968. Originally, local varieties featured smaller beans, and their quality was a bit lower. To make the crops better for our farmers, we started work on improving the cultivars.
The agricultural station developed varieties that were easier to cultivate while producing larger beans and yielding bigger harvests. These new cultivars were offered to farmers. At this point in time, division of labor was rising in Taiwan's agriculture sector, making small farmers more willing to try new crops.
Pigs were starting to be raised on hog farms, so other farmers stopped raising pigs, and therefore they stopped growing sweet potatoes. Then the Azuki beans arrived at the scene, offering better yields and prices than soybeans, so everyone turned to Azuki beans.
With bigger harvests, desserts like Adzuki bean wheel cakes, Adzuki bean soup, Adzuki beans on ice, and Adzuki bean jelly became widely popular treats. But then, China started exporting its own Adzuki beans to Japan. Facing a stiff challenge, Taiwan farmers began to scale back their Adzuki bean operations. Not only that, throughout the 70s and the 80s, Taiwan's standard of living increased, and the market flooded with new and exciting snacks that made Adzuki beans pale in comparison. Today, Adzuki bean sweets are well past their heyday and are now only one of the many options available to consumers. Although the Adzuki bean is no longer in vogue, some young farmers hope to buck the trend.
我们10号一个优势就是它的那个整个一个豆角会呈现更饱实、更大颗。
One of them is Chenan Mao, who in 2008 decided to return to the countryside to work the land. At the insistence of his wife, he harvests his Azuki beans by hand. Usually, before Azuki beans are collected, the fields are sprayed with chemicals to ensure the plants dry up completely to better preserve the beans. Beans sprayed with these chemicals are often astringent to the taste.
我去过福冈，日本，去参访那些神拜。
I went to Fukuoka in Japan to visit veteran farmers, and there I found out that Japanese people really dislike that astringent taste. The Japanese say that the bitter taste comes from tannins, so we thought about whether we could produce beans without tannins, and it is possible. The first step is to let the beans ripen completely.
To provide consumers with a safe product, the couple waits until all the Adzuki beans have ripened fully before picking them up one by one to dry in the sun. Then they inspect each bean carefully before packing them up. The couple hopes that their efforts will create a new market for Adzuki beans. Over the past few years, local officials in Kaohsiung and Pingtung have also been trying to achieve an Adzuki bean renaissance. With Adzuki bean festivals and an Adzuki bean marathon, local governments are trying to put the spotlight on the places where the crop is grown. They also do this through promoting local foods, such as Pingtung County's secret delicacy, savory Adzuki bean rice porridge. This rice porridge is a staple in Pingtung's farming communities, outside of which it is virtually unknown. These days, visitors from out of town are treated to a bowl at government events.
它这个比较费工，县府如果有办活动的话。
It's very labor intensive. If their county government holds an event, we might be called to cook some up.
Whereas Pingtung dishes up savory snacks, Kaohsiung is all about the sweets.
莊誒，哇，係新嘅產品嚟啊！是。
試隻看咩啊？
Taiwan's third biggest Adzuki bean production area is Kaohsiung's Daliao district. Here, the local Farmers Association has partnered with a food company to sell Adzuki beans in the form of foods like Adzuki bean water, Adzuki bean beer, and Adzuki bean paste. In particular, their Adzuki bean paste has gotten rave reviews.
Nowadays, people are very busy, so they don't have time to cook the beans. With this, you can open up the can and they're ready to eat. It takes just a second. Our colleagues have test tasted them many times. In fact, the department head even got fat from this. All those taste tests add up.
Over 2 years of R&D and experimentation, we tested the starchiness, the thickness of the skin, as well as the density, to achieve that melt-in-your-mouth sensation.
Daliao's canned bean paste was a hit at its debut. Shortly after launch, the product was selected as a souvenir gift for President Tsai Ing-wen's inauguration ceremony in 2020.
We were all thrilled that our Azuki bean paste reached the national stage. We were all very happy.
Since arriving in Taiwan as a high-end Japanese dessert 100 years ago, adzuki beans have become a staple in the national cuisine. Although they're no longer seen as high-end, their timeless flavor and creative iterations will continue to delight taste buds for generations to come.